Hello. My fiancée said she needed to see if we were truly meant to be, then vanished for a week with her male spiritual advisor. I didn't chase after her. I just canceled the wedding. 2 months later, she came crawling back. My name is Robin. I am 34, and I work as a chef in San Jose. My schedule is predictable but intense. Early mornings for prep, long nights on the line, and weekends when most people relax are usually my busiest shifts. I like the structure, though. Kitchens run on timing and discipline, and I tend to carry that mindset into the rest of my life. My fiancée is Rebecca, 31. We had been together for a little over 3 years and engaged for 8 months. For the past year, we had been living together in a small apartment near downtown that I originally rented before she moved in. Most of our recent weekends were spent doing normal wedding planning things like visiting venues, arguing over guest lists, and trying to keep both families happy. I am posting because I want to know if I overreacted or if I ignored obvious warning signs for too long because I thought we were already committed. Rebecca has always been the type of person who dives hard into whatever new self-improvement trend she finds. It is never just a hobby. It becomes her whole worldview for a while. There was a phase where everything had to be organic and raw. Then breathwork workshops. Then something she called shadow integration. Each one came with new rules about how people were supposed to live. About 3 months before our wedding, she discovered a guy she called a spiritual advisor. His name was George. Mid-40s, long scarves, soft voice. The kind of person who talks like every sentence is supposed to be profound. Rebecca started seeing him for what she called guidance sessions. Apparently, he helped people align their emotional truth. At first, I ignored it. I work in kitchens where everyone deals with stress in different ways. If meditation or talking to someone helped her relax, I had no problem with it. But within a month, she was seeing him twice a week. She started quoting things he said like they were psychological facts. If I disagreed with anything, she would roll her eyes and say I was too stuck in linear thinking to understand deeper energy. Then one Tuesday night, while I was sitting at our table reviewing catering logistics for the wedding, she calmly told me she needed space to determine if we were truly meant to be together. I thought she meant a weekend at her sister's place. Instead, she packed a bag, grabbed several dresses, half her toiletries, and left with George in his car. Before she walked out, she told me not to contact her for a week because outside pressure could disrupt the process. For the first hour after Rebecca left, I honestly thought the whole thing was some kind of dramatic cooling-off period. We had argued before like any couple planning a wedding, and sometimes people need space. What made this different was the detail she added right before closing the door. She said George believed couples should temporarily separate before marriage to test energetic independence. That sentence stuck in my head the rest of the night while I was standing in my kitchen chopping vegetables for the next day's prep. When you work as a chef, you get used to thinking while your hands move automatically. I must have diced 2 full crates of onions without really tasting the air. At some point, the situation stopped feeling confusing and started feeling very simple. My fiancée had just left for a week with another man who she claimed was guiding her spiritually. She told me not to contact her. She also framed the entire thing as something I should respect if I truly supported her growth. I did not call her. The next morning, I woke up at 5, went to the restaurant, ran breakfast service, and kept moving. Kitchens are loud and fast, which helped. Nobody there had any idea what was going on in my personal life, and I did not volunteer it. Around midday, Rebecca texted me once. The message said she had arrived safely and that this process was important for both of us. She said George believed the separation would reveal whether our connection was authentic or based on habit. I stared at that message for about 30 seconds. Then I put my phone back in my locker and finished the shift. Over the next couple of days, I started looking at the situation the same way I would evaluate a broken system in a kitchen. When something fails during service, you do not panic. You look at the inputs and the outcome. Input 1. My fiancée leaves for a week with another man. Input 2. She asks me not to contact her while they are together. Input 3. She frames the entire thing as emotional growth. The outcome was pretty obvious. By the 3rd day, I stopped feeling angry and started making decisions. First, I called the wedding venue and asked about the cancellation policy. Then I contacted the caterer, even though ironically I work in food myself. Then I started emailing vendors we had deposits with. The wedding was scheduled in 6 weeks. Most places told me the same thing. Deposits were gone. That was fine with me. What surprised me most was how calm I felt while doing it. Canceling a wedding turns out to be a very administrative process. I had always imagined if something like this happened it would involve dramatic conversations, emotional confrontations, or at least a long explanation to friends and family. Instead, it mostly involved emails, short phone calls, and people politely confirming that deposits were non-refundable. The venue manager sounded sympathetic, but not surprised. Apparently, canceled weddings happen more often than people think. She asked if I wanted to reschedule the date instead. I told her that would not be necessary. Next came the photographer, the DJ, the rental company for tables and decorations Rebecca had insisted on. Each call was the same conversation. I kept it simple. The wedding was no longer happening. Please cancel the booking. By the end of the fourth day, almost everything was closed out. The only people I had not told yet were our families. I handled that Friday evening after my shift. My parents live about an hour away, so I called them first while I was sitting in my car outside the restaurant. I explained the situation without adding commentary. Rebecca had decided to leave for a week with someone she considered a spiritual advisor. Because of that, I had canceled the wedding. There was a long silence from my mother. Then she said something very practical. She asked if Rebecca was planning to come back and continue planning the wedding like nothing happened. I told her I had no idea. My father spoke next and said I probably saved myself a divorce. That conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. Rebecca's parents were more complicated. I did not want to blindside them, but I also was not interested in defending a decision I had already made. So I called her father and told him the same version of events. He sounded confused more than anything else. He asked where Rebecca was. I told him she had taken a week away with a man named George who was advising her spiritually. Another long silence. Then he said he would talk to her when she came home. By the time Sunday rolled around, the apartment felt different. Not sad exactly, just quieter and a lot simpler. Rebecca still had not contacted me again. That is when the final piece of the situation occurred to me. She had left expecting to come back and continue the wedding planning. She just had no idea that by the time she returned, the wedding would no longer exist. Rebecca came back the following Monday evening. I knew the exact moment because I was finishing dinner prep in the apartment when I heard her key in the lock. For a second, I considered whether I should leave before she walked in, but there was no reason to do that. It was still technically my place, and I had nothing to avoid. She stepped inside like someone returning from a casual trip, not like someone who had just disappeared for a week with another man 2 months before her wedding. She had a small suitcase and a tote bag. Her first sentence was not an apology. She looked around the living room and said the apartment felt energetically lighter. That was the first moment I realized she had absolutely no idea what had happened during the week she was gone. She started talking immediately about the experience. According to her, the retreat had been transformative. George had helped her process emotional blocks that were apparently affecting our relationship. She said the space away from me gave her clarity. I listened for about 2 minutes while leaning against the kitchen counter. Then she said something that finally made the situation clear. She told me she was ready to move forward with the wedding now that she had done the work. Not once during that explanation did she ask what I had been doing while she was gone. Not once did she ask how I felt about her leaving with another man for 7 days. From her perspective, the break had simply been part of a personal growth exercise. So I interrupted her. I told her the wedding was canceled. She laughed at first because she thought I was joking. When she realized I was serious, the expression on her face changed quickly from amused to irritated. Her first reaction was not concern. It was anger. She asked why I would make a huge decision like that without consulting her. That question genuinely caught me off guard. I reminded her that she had left for a week with George and specifically told me not to contact her during that time. Rebecca rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. According to her, nothing inappropriate happened during the retreat. George was a mentor, and the entire experience was about emotional alignment. Then she said something that I still think about sometimes. She said a supportive partner would have trusted the process. That was the moment I realized the week away had not changed her at all. Rebecca did not take the news well. For the first few seconds after I told her the wedding was canceled, she just stared at me like I had said something completely irrational. Then the irritation turned into that specific tone she used whenever she thought I was failing to understand something obvious. She said I was reacting from ego. Apparently, George had warned her this might happen. She explained that when one partner begins emotional growth, the other sometimes resists because it threatens the old dynamic. According to her, canceling the wedding was proof that I was uncomfortable with the deeper work she had been doing. I remember thinking how strange it was that a man who had never met me could apparently diagnose my personality from a week-long retreat. I asked her one simple question. Did you think leaving for 7 days with another man 2 months before our wedding might affect my decision to marry you? Rebecca immediately waved that off. She said the entire point of the separation was to test whether our relationship could survive independence. If I truly trusted her, I would have respected the space instead of sabotaging everything. That word stuck with me. Sabotaging. From her point of view, I was the one who damaged the relationship. She started pacing around the living room while explaining that spiritual partnerships require maturity. She said my reaction showed I was still operating from fear instead of alignment. Meanwhile, I was standing there thinking about the practical side of the situation. The venue was canceled. The vendors were canceled. Both families had already been informed. The wedding date that had taken us 6 months to organize was gone. When I explained that part, she looked genuinely stunned. Not angry, not emotional, just surprised. Apparently, she thought I meant I had threatened to cancel the wedding. She had not considered that I would actually follow through. Then she asked the question that made the conversation even stranger. She asked if we could simply book everything again, like the entire situation had been a scheduling misunderstanding. I told her no. That was when the conversation finally stopped sounding like a lifestyle podcast and started sounding like a breakup. Rebecca stood in the middle of the living room for a few seconds after I said no, like she was recalculating the situation. Then the tone shifted. The calm voice she had been using disappeared, and the argument started almost instantly. She said I was punishing her for trying to improve herself. She said most men would be grateful to have a partner willing to do deep emotional work before marriage. I asked her again if she understood what leaving with George actually looked like from the outside. She immediately got defensive and said I was twisting the story. According to her, nothing romantic happened. She repeated that several times, like the accusation itself was offensive. George was a guide, not a threat, and the retreat had involved meditation, long conversations, and something she called energetic clearing. I told her that whether anything happened or not was almost irrelevant. The issue was that she chose another man's guidance over basic respect for the relationship we already had. That sentence made her snap. She started raising her voice and accusing me of insecurity. She said the fact that I canceled the wedding without asking her proved that I was controlling. She even said I had embarrassed her in front of both families by making the decision alone. At that point, I stopped trying to debate it. Working in kitchens teaches you something useful about conflict. When a situation becomes loud and circular, it is already past the point of productive conversation. Rebecca kept talking, though. The volume kept climbing. She started saying I owed her another chance to finish the process with George because the retreat had not been long enough to fully integrate the lessons. That was the moment I made the next decision. I told her she needed to pack her things and leave. She stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. I explained it calmly. The apartment lease was in my name. I had no interest in continuing the relationship, and I definitely was not interested in restarting wedding plans. So it made more sense for her to stay somewhere else. Rebecca immediately said I could not just throw her out. I told her I was not throwing her out. I was ending the living arrangement. Then I walked to the bedroom, grabbed one of her suitcases from the closet, and set it in the hallway. That was when the fight actually escalated. Once the suitcase was sitting in the hallway, the argument lost most of its momentum. Rebecca stood there for a moment like she was waiting for me to back down. When it became clear that I was not changing my mind, the anger shifted into something colder. She said I was overreacting and that I would regret making such a drastic decision. I did not respond. At that point, the conversation had already repeated itself enough times. After about a minute, she walked into the bedroom and started pulling clothes out of the closet. The process was not calm. Hangers hit the floor. Drawers opened and closed harder than necessary. But the yelling mostly stopped. I stayed in the kitchen and gave her space to gather her things. From where I was standing, I could hear her moving around the apartment collecting items. Bathroom cabinets opening. The sound of bags being zipped. At one point, she walked past me with an armful of clothes and did not even look in my direction. It took about 20 minutes. Eventually, she dragged the suitcase into the hallway and grabbed the tote bag she had arrived with earlier that evening. She paused near the door and looked at me like she expected one final conversation. Instead, she asked if this was really how I wanted things to end. I told her the situation had ended the moment she decided to disappear for a week with George and frame it as some kind of relationship test. She shook her head and said I still did not understand what the retreat had been about. Then she said something that honestly confirmed I had made the right decision. She told me that once I had time to process my emotional reaction, I would probably realize George had been trying to help both of us. I did not argue with her. I just opened the apartment door. Rebecca grabbed her suitcase, stepped into the hallway, and said I was throwing away a relationship because I was afraid of growth. Then she walked out. I closed the door behind her and locked it. That was the last time I saw her for almost 2 months. Life got noticeably simpler after Rebecca left. The first couple of weeks were busy for me anyway. The restaurant was heading into a seasonal menu change, which meant longer hours, supplier meetings, and a lot of testing new dishes. Kitchens are good places to recover from personal drama because there is always something that needs to be done right now. Most people in my life already knew the wedding had been canceled, so there were not many awkward conversations left to have. When friends asked what happened, I kept the explanation short. Rebecca decided to leave for a week with a spiritual advisor and test the relationship. I decided that was enough information for me. That explanation usually ended the discussion pretty quickly. About 6 weeks passed without any contact from her. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a message from a number I still had saved but had not seen pop up in a while. It was Rebecca. The message was surprisingly normal. She asked if we could talk and said she had been doing a lot of reflection. According to her, the last couple of months had given her clarity about our relationship. I did not answer right away. I was in the middle of prep and my hands were literally covered in flour. Later that evening, I checked the message again. She had sent another one. This time it was longer. She said she realized things had gotten out of balance during the time she was working with George. She admitted that leaving the way she did might have been unfair to me. Then she said she wanted to meet and see if there was any way we could repair what happened. That part caught my attention, because when Rebecca left the apartment 2 months earlier, she had been completely convinced she was right. Now suddenly she wanted to talk. I asked when she wanted to meet. Her reply came almost immediately. She said she could come by the apartment that evening if I was available. The wording made me pause for a second. Not meet somewhere. Not grab coffee. She wanted to come back to the apartment. So I told her we could talk, but not at my place. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the restaurant the next day. When I walked in and saw her sitting there, it was obvious something had changed. Rebecca looked far less confident than the last time I saw her. When Rebecca saw me walk into the cafe, she stood up immediately. 2 months earlier, she had left my apartment convinced she was completely right about everything. The person sitting across from me now looked much less certain. She started the conversation before I even ordered coffee. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking about what happened and wanted to apologize for how she handled the situation. According to her, the retreat with George had made her realize some difficult things about herself. I listened without interrupting. Rebecca said she had gotten too caught up in what she called external guidance. She admitted that letting another person influence major decisions about our relationship was a mistake. She also said that leaving for a week without properly discussing it with me had been unfair. It was the first time she had framed it that way. Then she leaned forward and asked if there was any chance we could start over. Not restart the wedding planning immediately. She said she understood that would be unrealistic. But maybe we could rebuild things slowly and see where the relationship went. I asked her one question. Was she still working with George? She hesitated for a second before answering. Then she said no. Apparently, their professional relationship had ended a few weeks earlier. She described it vaguely, saying she realized she needed to focus on real life instead of constant introspection. That answer explained a lot. When she left my apartment months earlier, George had been the authority she trusted. Now that influence was gone, Rebecca kept talking. She said she missed the stability we had. She missed living together. She missed how predictable our life used to be. At one point, she even said she realized I had always been the most grounded person in her life. Then she finally said the sentence that made her intentions very clear. She asked if she could come back to the apartment and talk more about fixing things. Like the last 2 months had been a temporary pause. I sat there for a moment thinking about everything that had happened since the night she left with George. Then I gave her my answer. I told Rebecca no. I did not drag the answer out or soften it with a long explanation. After everything that had already happened, there was no point pretending the situation was complicated. She looked at me like she expected a different response. Rebecca asked if I was sure. She said people make mistakes and relationships survive worse things all the time. According to her, the last 2 months had given her perspective about what she almost lost. I told her the problem was not just the week she disappeared. The real issue was the way she viewed the entire situation. When she left with George, she did it with complete confidence that she was right, and I was the one who needed to grow. When she came back, she expected the wedding to continue like nothing had happened. And now that George was no longer part of her life, suddenly she wanted stability again. None of those decisions included any real consideration for the person she was supposed to be marrying. Rebecca tried once more to argue that the retreat had helped her understand herself better. She said she was not the same person now. I told her that might be true. But I was also not the same person who had been sitting at our kitchen table planning a wedding while she packed a bag to leave with another man. For a few seconds, she looked like she wanted to push the conversation further. Then she stopped. She sat back in her chair and nodded slowly, like she was finally realizing that this time the decision was not going to change. We finished the conversation quietly after that. When I left the cafe, that was the last time I spoke to Rebecca. Looking back now, canceling the wedding during that week she was gone was probably the clearest decision I made in the entire situation. At the time it felt abrupt. Now it just feels like basic common sense. Bye-bye.